Alright, so you've had a chance to read through this bit. I'll just walk through it again by mouth. We're doing a constant burn profile, or a constant acceleration burn, where you tip up slightly above the horizon as you burn to hold your altitude constant. As you slow down, you are going to end up having to tip up slightly higher and higher and higher. Then, once you're finally stopped completely, you fall straight down, which turns the end of the landing into a small suicide burn. You hopefully want to get the periapsis you start at to be very low to the ground, so that this distance of the vertical suicide burn portion of it is very tiny. But it is a standard suicide burn, vertical suicide burn, which is generally the least efficient kind of suicide burn. But hopefully you are still fairly efficient if you set the PE close to the ground to begin with. So you do a tiny suicide burn, which means fall until you predict the last moment you can kick in the engines at full power to kill off all the speed just before you'd hit the ground, plus a tiny error margin. And then finally you descend slightly, kind of slowly across that tiny error margin to the bottom. The reason you want the small error margin is because you never know if the simulation is slightly off, and you never know if the terrain is slightly off from what you would predict it, because it might be on like a weird slope, and the part you're measuring might not be the actual closest piece of the terrain. But the goal is to make step 4 as small as you possibly can, because that's inefficient. You want the suicide burn really to stop you duke right at the ground if you can. For practical reasons, you can't quite do that. You have to be a few meters above the ground when you stop, and then descend constant for those last few meters. But the prediction problem I'm having, that you've seen in previous episodes if you've been following it, is that this prediction here is slightly off, even though I'm using the calculation that should be right for a constant acceleration distance. How much distance do you travel under constant acceleration? Or in this case, deceleration, which is the same thing. This formula should work, but it's not quite right. It's very, very close. But we're tending to impact at about 10 to 20 meters a second, right at the very end of the burn. Like it's predicting as if this distance is just ever so slightly shorter than it really needs. So what possible reasons could there be for that being wrong? One possibility is that because physics ticks in the game are a 25th of a second apart under default settings, that might mean that your burn might be starting a little too late, because you can't start right in the middle of a tick. You have to wait for the next simulation step to get your readings to realize it's time to start now. So that could make you off by a 25th of a second, which could make you a bit late, but I don't think it could account for as much of a problem as we're getting. Another possibility, which is definitely a possibility, is that determining what A is, this acceleration is, it's the leftover acceleration after you account for the amount of thrust necessary to counter gravity. So if you have a certain amount of thrust, and let's say you need to spend 20% of your engine's thrust just to hover, the remaining 80% of that engine's thrust is what goes into calculating what A is. Well, the problem with that is that at different altitudes above the ground, gravity is ever so slightly different. The closer you are to the center of the planet, the higher gravity is. So if I'm calculating this distance based upon the slightly less gravity that you get up at the start of the burn, it may be that the fact that gravity is just ever so slightly stronger at the bottom of the burn may be accounting for the problem. The other possibility is that because Kerbal Space Program itself is a discrete simulation and not actually a continuous phenomenon, that even though this math may be right for a continuous phenomenon, it may be wrong for the game's simulation, because since it simulates every so many time steps, it changes your velocity, that it could be lagging behind the ideal curve, like this diagram is trying to show. So, I don't know which of these three possibilities is actually the reason it's wrong. What I'm going to do today is try to fix it in such a way that I don't actually need to know precisely which one of these three is the reason. I'm going to try to fix it so that it has a slight amount of slop in it, so that it doesn't really care which of these three is the reason. It'll still adjust anyway. But before I start that, actually, number 2, I know for a fact that number 2 is definitely a bit wrong. There's no question that number 2 is wrong. So I think I'm going to fix number 2 first, and then try to see if I still have problems, and if I do, I'll fix number 1 and 3 with kind of a generic heuristic that doesn't really care why it's off, and can just adjust. So I'm going to start with number 2. The calculation based on the gravity as it would be at the top of the burn is wrong. Now, it would also be wrong if I calculated it based on the gravity at the bottom of the burn, because that would make my estimate off in the opposite direction. What I really need to know is what's the average gravity during the burn, and that's a bit trickier. I think the answer is it's not quite halfway, and I don't want to do the actual differential calculus to work out where it actually is, but I'm going to fudge it slightly and say that I'm going to go for halfway. So whatever half the difference between the two is, I'll pick that as my calculated guess. So let me start that right now. Right up here, I assume that my leftover thrust is whatever my available thrust is, minus the amount of thrust necessary to hold me up against current gravity, where gravity is based upon my current position. So all I'm going to do is slightly change this as follows. So I'm going to have surface gravity, which is almost exactly the same thing, except I want the altitude at the terrain height, not the altitude where I am, which is my altitude above sea level minus the alt radar above the ground. That should get me the altitude of the terrain above sea level. So that will be surface gravity. Which I will be using here instead of grav. And apparently, I never use grav anywhere else, so I'll just comment that out for now. So that's my first change. Let's try that and see what change that makes. Okay. So I will do what I usually do, which is attempt to do this with a bit of hyper editing. Okay, I can't quite do it here. Yeah, that's a good point. I should actually keep doing both of these two and take the average of the two, the halfway point between them. My parentheses are messed up. There, that's better. Let's do it that way. It's a very good point there, Kovar. That's better. Now I will load up. Let's see, where was it? I had one of these that I was using for my Tylo landing. Yeah, let's try that and see if it's about right. Oh, wait a minute. My TWR on this, it is above 0. Okay, that's good. Now let's hyperedit cheat this. Whoops. Definitely not what I want to do. We are using Tylo as our test. Alright, so our periapsis is here. It is quite low. Let's slightly move this again. Yeah, that's what I was afraid of. I don't want that in the path. That's too high. One click, that's too low. That'll do for now. It's not perfect, but it'll do. Okay, so I'll come in, I'll suicide, I'll constant altitude burn there. Increase the inclination. Any particular reason? Just because? I don't see that making a big difference, but okay. I can't... The periapsis isn't in the simple tab. It's only got this. And what I find frustrating is I couldn't find anywhere in here where I actually type a periapsis rather than slider bar it. Alright, well, let's get started anyway. Let me remember to quick save it here, just in case. So we'll cheat a little bit and run right off the archive just for testing purposes. The reason for saying false, this is a reminder, is to tell the CA land script that I'm not using a sky crane arrangement. Yeah, I really wish that HyperEdit allowed you to actually type a periapsis. I couldn't find anywhere that you can do it. So what I have to do is indirectly set it by changing the eccentricity of the orbit rather than the periapsis of it. Because you can type the eccentricity. This is a slightly different craft than I had last time, but it should still work. And I wish I could time warp this faster, but Tylo has really annoying time warp limit rules. Oh, nice little shot of Jewel in the distance. Okay, 30 seconds away. Well, less because I'm physics warping, but 30 real-time seconds. Okay, now we're getting close. Let me drop back down. We're 5 seconds away. In this particular model, I'm deliberately using a slightly weaker engine because I wanted the burn to take a little longer. And if you look here at the remaining fuel, I deliberately didn't fill these all the way because I want it to stage halfway through. So I need this to run out for that to happen. Also, as it slows down, it should start tipping up more and more extreme to have to hold the altitude. Oh, hey, you know what I never did that I probably should have before I hit the quick save? I should have quick saved with the panels out. And now that it has much weaker thrust, it detected its need to have to aim higher up at a steeper angle. And now it really does look like that kind of constant altitude burn profile you're used to seeing. Which I actually really like. I like the way this looks. And that's another reason why I switched to a different lander, is I wanted to prove that that is working well by giving it a weak enough thrust-to-weight ratio that it actually does have to pitch up quite a ways. Although it does mean we have to wait a little while longer here. So maybe I shouldn't have done that just because it makes these tests take a lot longer. Maybe... well, we're getting near done now anyway. Maybe I should have done that under physics warp. Because the script will run. A kOS command core will still run under physics warp. The problem is that what you are effectively doing, as far as the simulated universe is concerned, is you're cutting back your execution time. It's like you're putting a slower chip in it. Because it takes longer between executions. More of the universe moves between executions when you're in physics warp. Alright. Now this is going to be a more severe suicide burn because of the fact that we're dropping from higher up than we have been in previous episodes. Hmm. Well, it started a little higher up, but that's, again, because it's a really weak engine compared to what we've been using. Where's my shadow? I don't know. That's still landing a bit hard. Don't believe this. This isn't quite true. But it's a little better. It's still not perfect, but it is a little better. I mean, you can see it hit pretty hard just from the fact that it ended up burying the legs in the ground. And if you right-click them and look, I think you'll find out that they're actually broken. Yeah, the ability to retract them is gone off the menu, which is what happens when they break. So it's still not perfect, but it's better. Okay, well, let's go and try that again with some more script changes then. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to fix my quick save a little bit here and have it be quick saved with the panels out. There. Well, I may want to use a different ship that does the job faster, but what I'm afraid of is that I would then have to run it one more time again, just to get a baseline to go off of, because it would be slightly different than this one was. But that may be a good idea. Yeah, why don't I do that, actually? Let me, first of all, I'm going to give this thing a name. There we go, Tylo typo. So I will name that for a reason, which is that one of the things you can do in HyperEdit is you can tell it, please put a new vessel right where an old vessel already is and in the same orbit as it. So that way I don't have to fiddle with HyperEdit again. I can launch my new vessel and put it right next to where that one is and give it the same parameters. Alright, different ship that will land faster. I apparently am using a slightly different save than I have been in the past because I don't actually see the same super big lander I was using before. But that's okay. I'll make a new one. That's not that hard. I will simply get rid of this. And put a more beefier bottom on it. That's probably too beefy. I want to make sure that it actually stages it away before it tries to do the real landing. That'll look ridiculous. Let's use that. It's important that I have less than 3,000 delta V on this. Otherwise it will still use the bottom part for the final landing. I want that gone by the time it does that. Yeah, let's go with that. Think everything's good. Launch. Actually, let me turn that gimbal way down before we start. I want to rendezvous it with Tylo typo. Go. And it should appear in space right next to it, very nearby with it. Yeah, there it is. And in roughly the same orbit as it, like so. Okay, good. We will begin from here with our quick save from now on. So I'm just rerunning the exact same thing to get a new baseline with the new vessel, just to be sure. And then you can kind of see the old lock steering code having a hard time getting this thing acclimated and down. There we go. Less than a minute. And it doesn't aim up nearly as high above the horizon now with the much more powerful engine on it. Ah! Too much fuel. Because this is definitely going to throw its calculations off. I mean, in a major way. This will really break it. Because it's going to calculate as if it has this much thrust to use, rather than this much thrust. So I can predict right now this is going to be a major failure, before we even get any further. Because the script is designed under the assumption that your final landing will occur under one consistent engine. So this will be humorously wrong. Yep. I'll just do the same thing with a slightly reduced amount of fuel. Make sure that it hits the stage before. Okay. Boy, if anyone ever made a mod that would actually let you time warp better at low altitude, I would love that in an instant. I know it would be a little hard to do because you have to actually change a few things about the actual game engine itself, but I mean, the reason for the time warp limits are because below a certain altitude, it loads the real terrain polygons rather than just having the planet be holographic. And I would be perfectly happy saying, you know what, go ahead and don't load them yet, just let me time warp, and don't load them until I'm much, much lower, so that I can actually time warp at a low altitude. I would really love that. But I'm sure Squad has their reasons why they deny it. There must be some technical problem that gets in the way of that. They wouldn't have added it just to be annoying. There's got to be a reason. They have no choice. Just don't know what it is. Oh yeah, I forgot to fiddle with the gimbal and turn it down. Oh well. There we go. Well, I realize this should actually behave exactly the same as it did before, because by this point in the program, it's operating on the same weak engine it originally had. And I actually like the rather weak landing engine, because, I mean, typically speaking, in reality, if you're landing a probe, you're probably not landing it with something that has a thrust-to-weight ratio of like 10. You're probably doing it with a rather weak engine. Someone just posted me a link in the chat to a mod that does exactly what I was talking about the warp unlocker. I may consider that in the future. I don't want to do it right now during this stream because I don't want to have to stop and reinstall new things, but I'll look for it in the future and see. Okay, so fairly similar to before. Didn't break all the legs this time, but I think it did mess this one up. Nope, raise. 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 Okay, so it actually worked. It's still slightly off, because my calculation said that it was actually going to stop up above the ground first. And it clearly didn't do that. However, it wasn't as bad, although I didn't really change the code any. So that's not really a permanent fix. Actually, you know what I'll do here? Even though I can't time warp while low, I wonder if I can quick save while low. I can. Okay, good. I can quick save while here. That'll help a little in the future. Alright, so now let's work on this part. Rather than locking the throttle to this, I think what I'm actually going to do is adjust it based on how well I'm doing compared to my prediction. If I'm below my prediction, I will up the throttle slightly. So how do I work this out? Probably with a simple P controller, I think. I have these formula up here. I can work out what the leftover thrust is at current gravity. I can work out what the stop distance should currently be. And adjust it based on that? Yeah, let me see if I have the right idea there. Okay, so first off, so I start using that correctly, using whatever current local gravity is again. Then my stop distance should automatically start using that new value. So what I want to do is, if my current distance, which I can calculate out as alt radar plus safety dist, oh yeah. So stop distance is automatically being recalculated. And safety dist I'll keep on there. This is how much distance I should currently have to alt radar. If my alt radar is smaller than this, I want slightly more throttle. Let me think about this. Yeah, okay, so if... Let's make this a ratio. Alt radar divided by the distance I actually want. If they exactly match, I want a throttle exactly this much. Whereas, if the distance I actually have is less, I want more throttle. So actually, I think I have this ratio upside down. I want it this way around. Yeah, if the distance I need is bigger than the distance I have, I want more throttle. Alright, so I'm going to take this expression and try to use it down here. So this is my normal level of throttle that I would normally want if everything was working well. But I'm going to multiply that by this as a fudge factor. And let me just parenthesize that to make sure. I think that's what I want, but I think I want to be more verbose about what I mean. So I do this, and I time my original calculation as if I had slightly less thrust than I really do. To give myself just enough fudge that I can push the throttle higher than I intended if necessary. Now that may seem unnecessary if I'm burning off fuel and therefore I already have the condition of having a bit more thrust than I want, but remember you do have those weird electric engines that tend to not use up mass much at all, so just to be sure I do have the fudge room to play with, I'm going to make my original calculation as if I had slightly less thrust than I actually do. Now, with all of that math going on, I should probably display some of that somewhere. Otherwise, this is not going to go too well. I'm not going to be able to watch what I'm doing. So give myself some room at the top. Let's see, where else am I printing something? I'm printing something. No. Where else did I have a print at? I know I had one somewhere. There it is. I knew I had one somewhere. So when I get to here, where was I? When I get to here, I'd like to be printing. So I'll be printing out the predicted distance and the distance I actually have at the top. We're going to need that down to some pretty significant digits where you won't notice anything. Okay, so I think that gives me the display I want at the top. Everything looks fine. Think I'm ready to give this a try. Just want to double check I'm not doing anything wrong here. I am sort of wondering about all these extra locks I'm throwing in, whether or not this may not be quite right. I'm going to just increase the safety margin here slightly, just because of all the extra locks I've made. Alright, let's see what we get. Getting close, getting close. Seven seconds away. It has to pitch up pretty high there to keep from falling. Interesting. Alright. I hope I did this correctly. We'll see what happens. There goes my first stage. Let's see how this is doing. It's predicting a much lower throttle. I don't necessarily like that. Let's keep looking at this. Oh, throttle's going slightly up. Slightly up. Where's that shadow? Okay, so if you look at what it was doing here, the predicted distance and the actual distance. Oh my, current throttle 192. That must be something that happened right at impact. That can't be what it was actually doing all along. Yeah, so it seems to believe, if I'm reading this correctly, it believed it had plenty of room. Oh wait, this is the numbers as they appeared right after impact. That's not believable. I almost might need to throw a log in there and actually record what these are in a file you can actually read, because this is only showing me what happened at the point of impact, and at that point all the forces are completely messed up. But I think that that means that I need this ratio to be more strong. I think the fudge ratio is too weak. Let me think about it. Yeah, let's see. To get up to a value of 2 times, I would need the distance to be off by a factor of 2 times. And I think that that's too weak. I think I need to respond to this problem more authoritatively. So, to respond to this more authoritatively with a bit more drastic reaction, I think I need to say, let's say 1.5? No, that's being too weak. What I could do is dump this into a PID controller and do it really properly, but I'm going to try doing it by just a dumb P controller first, which doesn't really need the routines for it. Yeah, let's do that and slightly increase the importance of it. Not including safety dist. You're right, I'm not. I thought that was already in stopped dist. Very good catch there, Korvar. And this, I actually forgot that round is based on how many digits after the point, not total digits. So I don't really need that to be as high as it was. Alright, let's try that. And what I plan to do if I can get this to work quickly is I plan to then throw a couple more tests at it on different planets with different sized probes, small, large, whatever, just to make sure that it is as generic as I wanted it to be. Once I get it to work on this particular one, I want to make sure it works on others as well. Actually, you know what? I'm going to try and aim the camera this way because I know that's where the shadows are. Because the sun is there. So I'm going to get the camera aimed correctly first. There we go. See, I don't think this is integral windup. If you look here, it actually is falling. So it is correct for it to aim up higher. And then once it does start climbing, it starts pitching down again. And then stabilizes it before it finishes. So I think that actually is right. I don't think that was integral windup making it pitch up higher. Sun is that way. Shadow should be that way. Get the camera right to begin with. Okay, I think by multiplying it by 3, I may have overdone it. But it did slow the throttle down upon realizing it was overdoing it. Yeah, that was interesting. Also, I noticed that when it actually makes the transition from the end of the suicide burn to the beginning of the constant descent, it seems to actually cut for a second and come back in, and right at that moment, you really don't want it doing that. I think it's because at this point I start using a PID controller for the very first time, and it needs a moment for that PID controller to catch up and realize what it's doing. So the transition from not the PID control function to the PID control function is making it take a few moments to catch up and realize where it should be, and right at that very moment I don't have those few moments of catch up. So maybe I really should be doing this on a PID controller and use the same one I'm using here? Yeah, I don't know. I dislike that little bit at the end. But maybe actually, yeah, that's a tough call. At any rate, 3 was too high here, so yeah, let's reduce that. In fact, let me reduce it not very much. I mean, I really think that it was way too high. How to handle the fact that right during the transition it screws up, I wonder. Oh, I know how. I will call PID seek once, throwing the result away, and then immediately call it a second time. Because up till this point, I'm still operating on this lock throttle. It doesn't switch to this one until here. So if I make the very first call to PID seek where I just throw the value away, now wait a tick and then do it again, it should have the values all set up the way it likes. That should help slightly. Secondarily, I will make this a much stronger, quicker to react PID controller. It'll be a little twitchy, but that'll be fine. Okay. So I think when I do those two, I think I've got it perfect. I hope. So we'll do one more go on this lander, and then we'll do a couple others that are on other planets with different designs. Did I actually do this? I think I did. You know what? I'm not 100% certain. Let me just be sure. Let's see how this goes. What? There. Now that was gentle. The suicide burn-in measurements, what they're doing is if you'll notice, it looks at this number of seconds compared to the last timestamp. When it's been more than 2 seconds, it prints one again. So these are only printing every 2 seconds, even though the check is occurring much more often than that, just because I didn't want to spam the screen with this constant spew. So, this isn't so bad. I don't think this is... That's why it's slightly off. You know what? While I'm at it, why don't I make this stop scrolling? Why don't I make this work like the other ones do? And while I'm at it, I also want to do... Let's see, where was it? I want to, once this is over, I want to get rid of this display as well. Okay. And now that I've changed that, I can probably make this print more often now. Probably don't need all of this mess about making it only print every 2 seconds. Okay, that shouldn't actually change anything significant, so I'm not going to retest just those small minor printing changes. I will instead go try a different craft on a different world. So, in the past, in my first attempt at doing the constant altitude script, I had an actual fairly nice looking landing with a sky crane I made. Let's see if I can find it. Rover plus sky crane plus kOS plus more fuel. I believe it was that. Yeah, it was that. So let's try this. I will put this in orbit around, oh, let's say the moon, and we will test it there. maybe a bit too eccentric. Does that look low enough? Nope, I want to go lower. Okay, I went too low. That looks about as low as I can actually dare. I'll pop, and there's a danger of hitting some landscape there. Alright, let's try that then. So this is a design that I had been working on before that already worked in a previous iteration of the script. What I'm doing now is called regression testing, which is when you make a change, you want to make sure that things that previously worked still work. Ah! Thank you for noticing that, Kovar. I should say true because this is a sky crane. Luckily I did it before it finished the script so it can pick up where it left off. It's fine. Wow, that is going to scrape really low over that ridge of the crater there. There's my shadow right there. So I am getting really low. Well, it wouldn't have made a big deal if it had been left at false. All it would have meant is that it would have just parked and landed instead of making the top of it take off and leave. It would have just parked and stayed put. It wouldn't have been impressive, but it wouldn't have been catastrophic if I had left it at false. Uh-oh. I don't like what I'm seeing here. Maybe we set the periapsis too low. Yep, we certainly did. Okay. So when you use this script for real in your remote tech saves, remember to make sure that you don't quite set your periapsis as low as I just did there. So rather than using hyperedit again, all I'm going to do here is just manually give it a tiny, tiny thrust here to pop this up a bit. There. Alright, let's try that again. And actually save what I just did. Okay. Although I did screw up that previous attempt, it wasn't the kOS script that screwed it up, it was me in my manual piloting and trying to set a periapsis that was lower than the terrain. Because I was trying to be a little overboard on how efficient I was trying to be with it. We're getting close. All right. Need a fix on the sun here. It's up there. Okay. So I want to be looking roughly that way to see the shadow. Yeah, this display looks much nicer. Getting close. And there goes the sky crane top. That was actually kind of spectacular. I liked that. Huh. And when the part of it that contained the kOS module blew up, the terminal went away. I have a chat question from someone. Let's see, can my PC run this? i7 790K, 4.0 gigahertz, AMD Radeon R9 380, 13 gig. That seems like fine specs for the game. To me, anyway. As far as how much this particular mod costs, in terms of how much it costs in the CPU usage and so on, it can be a little intensive depending upon what you wrote in your script. but it can also be pretty weak in how much it uses things. It does deliberately throttle itself back to be a kind of slowish computer so that it doesn't tax your actual gaming computer you're running this on. So I mean, sure, you could, if you want to, put a bunch of kOS modules on your computer, just put a bunch of them on your craft, and have them all running lots of code and eventually start bogging yourself down. But keep in mind, we typically run about 300 to 400 of our fake CPU instructions per update, when an update is about once every 25 times a second. And compared to most modern computers, that's pretty slow. We're deliberately pretending we're operating on slower computers, like old 1960s, 1970s kind of speeds. So I don't think we're going to tax your gaming computer too much if you put kOS on it. So anyway, there we go. The sky crane looked like it worked correctly. I still have in the script, where was it? My touch speed set to 2. I really think that now that we have everything else working better, I can set that back down to 1 like I'd originally meant it to be. Yeah, I have a pretty high-end machine here, but that's partly because I wanted to be able to do things like the Twitch streaming, which does tend to suck a lot of your CPU power, because you're basically on the fly performing video compression and uploading it up your network pipe while you're running the game. So people who run Twitch streams, they tend to have slightly higher end computers because Twitch eats up so much of it. Not Twitch itself, technically, the program that streams the data to Twitch, which in my case is OBS. But yeah, the specs you gave on your computer are fine. They'll work great. So there we have it. I think I have my script done. I've got it working in a couple of different situations. Does anyone want me to try it on somewhere else? Anyone have a suggestion I'll try it on before I close out the stream? I'll give it one more go on a new design. Maybe I could do a Minmus landing. They tend to be really slow. I tend to avoid doing them in demonstrations because you're sitting there twiddling your thumbs an awfully long time. Eve. The problem with Eve is it does have atmosphere, and this was designed for places without any atmosphere. So the calculations are going to be completely wrong when you have aero braking involved. I could try something on Minmus if people want me to. It seems to be a popular one. Everyone likes it. But I find Minmus to be really slow for demonstrating things. Should I just reuse the same design? Should I just reuse that same sky crane for Minmus? Oh, Gilly would be even worse than Minmus in terms of sitting around twiddling your thumbs waiting. The Gilly is really low. I mean, you're going, okay, I'm going to fall from 1,000 meters up to the ground. That'll take me several minutes. It'll be like that Philae lander they landed on the comet, and it bounced, and it took like hours to come back after one bounce. That's how low the gravity is. It would be kind of that way. Okay, we'll try the same design on Minmus. Let's go for that. Let's see, what looks good? Well, first of all, let's go with a more polar orbit. And let's orbit and turn it around the planet a bit here. There we go. That's kind of high, but it's hard to predict exactly how far the main planet will rotate. By the time we get there, the moon will probably have rotated and we'll be landing over here somewhere. Alright, let's do this one. Part of the reason I'm finishing out this topic of the CA land script today, which by the way I will be putting up so people can use it, part of the reason I'm finishing out this topic today is I was going to be doing some development on the actual kOS mod itself, but I'm sort of blocked on that because I'm waiting for Aaron Drake to put some changes in before I start working on the stuff I want to change, because otherwise they'd be simultaneous edits of very similar parts of the mod. And he's busy throughout the weekend, so I'm kind of blocked until he gets some free time to do his stuff. See where we're going to actually end up. I'm predicting right about here. So it looks like it's going to come to a stop. Oh, looks like it's going to be right around that little piece of flat. And now we wait to fall on Minmus. I suppose I could physics warp. I don't think it's too dangerous to do it here. I'll drop it out of physics warp when this starts getting low. But if you'll notice, the actual altitude and the suicide burn prediction, they're not that different. It's going to get really low to the ground before it does anything. And the reason is because it has such a huge amount of thrust to weight ratio that it can stop on a dime almost. So this is going to come down really low. Let's see, find the sun again. There. So shadow should be showing up there-ish. There-ish. Yep, there it is. Shadow appearing. Look at that bounce. I don't even see where the top went. Oh, there it is. That was a fairly smooth landing. Yeah, I designed the sky crane in such a way that the actual module, the kOS module, is actually on the sky crane and not on the rover, which, when you think about it, that's kind of dumb. It should be on the rover. So when the sky crane took off and ran away, it took the terminal with it. It went away because the sky crane went out of range. Yeah, the reason it bounced was because I actually know why that happened. If you look at what happens down here on the sky crane part, this is designed under the assumption you put the kOS module on the rover rather than on the crane. And so therefore, once the crane detaches, it assumes it has no control over the crane anymore. The crane is now a dumb piece of debris. Therefore, it has to tell the crane what to do before it lets go of it. And so the problem is I can't introduce any kind of a weight here, because I set the steering to something slightly off from up, I throttle it up, give it a second for those instructions to actually take place. Actually, this doesn't have to be this long. This could actually be just a very, very short amount of time, just an instant physics tick like that. That would help a little bit. Waits for it to actually take effect in the physics, and then gets rid of it. And the reason it has to do this before it stages is if it stages first, it no longer has control over the sky crane if the sky crane doesn't have the kOS unit on it. So it would not be able to tell the sky crane what to do once it stages it. But yeah, the weight didn't need to be 0.1, it could be 0.0001, and that's fine too. And I betcha that is going to get rid of... Whoops, that's not what I meant. And I bet you that's going to get rid of the slight bounce there was at the bottom. So just one more go, I'm going to see if I can get rid of that bounce by having changed that wait period slightly. Because that bounce does slightly concern me. Because even though it was no big deal, the reason it was no big deal is because we were on flat. If we were on a slight slope, that extra bounce could really throw things off. Especially on a place like here. Speaking of which, this time we'll be landing on a slight slope. I think my time warping slightly changed the characteristics. So here we go with a slopey landing. I'm assuming that's going to tip over. Like I said before when I first started this series about CA Lander, is that it does not bother taking into account the actual slope of the landing, because I wanted the script to be short and quick and simple. So if the person who's running the game can sort of pick a good spot to land where they know the terrain won't be too bad, this script will work fine. If they want to land somewhere dangerous where it actually has to seek out some better terrain, then you're going to need a much more complicated script that's going to take more space to actually look at the various altitudes of the terrain around the area and figure out that, gosh, this is too slopey, I shouldn't land here. This does not do that, so it will attempt to land here, and I'm sure we're all going to watch the thing flip end over end on this very steep hill. So what I'm expecting here is less bounce than we had before, but because we're now on a slope, it will have less bounce, but will probably tumble after the landing. Interesting. It set the brakes before it let itself go, but the brakes aren't strong enough on this slope. And notice the crane off in the distance, because what I tell it to do is to increase its throttle to slightly higher than the throttle it had when it was holding the weight up. And therefore, it only raises up in the air slightly. And because the values were so weak here, it's got such a weak throttle that it's still kind of thrusting itself over there, but not doing much. But yeah, there was no bounce. It may not survive this skiing incident here. It's trying to stop. It did put the brakes on, but yeah, this is... I'll be very impressed if this actually lives through this. I'm predicting it won't. That's really awfully steep. I wonder how the sky crane is doing. Is it still tumbling end over end? Yep, there it is. If this gets any steeper, the center of gravity, or center of mass, will be above the wheels. Uh-oh, it launched in the air a bit. It launched in the air a bit. Okay, there it goes. That center of gravity, or center of mass, is going to be slightly above the wheels, and it's going to tip over by the brakes the instant this slope gets any steeper than it already is. It's got to make sure it doesn't get any steeper, and then maybe this will live. Although I'm predicting when it hits the flat, it'll boom and tumble. And of course, luckily the rocks are all holographic. This isn't what I intended to do in my stream, but this is actually kind of nail-bitingly fun to watch. Let's see, our speed is up to 19. I think these wheels start to break if you go about faster than 30. At 20 meters a second, we're definitely getting to get a big bounce when we hit the flat. And look at how hard a time it is having to keep wheel contact with the ground. With the brakes fully on, it's still not quite able to slow itself down. And you can look every once in a while, the wheels come up off the ground. Oh, here we go. Losing solar panels. And losing the whole thing. Oh, no, wait, we just lost the bit. Hold on, what's still here? What did we lose? Oh, we lost the probe core. Yeah, so this would be a useless piece of junk now with no probe core on it. Even if this survives the landing, it has no probe core anymore, so it would be a useless thing. But I'm going to want to watch it because I kind of want to see how it ends up. Does it end up right side up or not, for example? It looks like it's going to end up on its back. Yeah, definitely on its back. Yeah, still has its science instruments, but has no probe core, can't be given any instructions or anything. Yeah, well, that's the slope we landed on. That is clearly an unworkable slope, and the script does not make any attempts to try to adjust for that. So, I don't consider that a failure of the script. I consider that the script being used for something that's outside its parameters. But there you go. The script worked on a couple of different locations, a couple of different levels of gravity. So there we go. I think I'm going to close this down for now. I'll take the script as it exists now, and I will put it out in the location I usually do, which, actually, why don't I show you where that is? If you look underneath my Twitch channel, you will see these panels here, one of which says, where do I find copies of the scripts? And that's a clickable link that goes to a Google Drive that has some of the code on it. So I'm going to be putting this there. You'll be able to see it after this episode finishes. I'll be putting it there like right now in a few minutes. And there we go. So I think I'm done for this for today. Thank you all for showing up and listening. And there we go.